Don't judge me.
Okay, and that was "Don't Judge Me" by FKA. There were some other artists involved in that song, but I just got the start of FKA. This is Media Trackle on Edge Media Mothership. We were rebadged as Media Mothership. On Edge Radio 99.3, I'm Dr. Craig Norris, joined by B.A. Zeke. Hey, B.A. Zeke.
What up?
What up, yo?
I'm glad to be here again for second week in a row. Last time I was on, I wasn't able to come on the next week in a row, so I'm hoping to keep the streak going.
That's right. It is a bit like one of the challenges. Each week you do it. It's like mileage points for exercise. You make a greater impact to the collective consciousness of Hobart.
Exactly. Yeah, come in and I get better every time I'm on, hopefully.
And the world around us. Yeah. I mean, we're streaming on YouTube via Media Mothership or Twitch on Craig Media, as well as on demand on the Edge Radio website or on the old-fashioned analog system or digital system of 99.3 FM, broadcast from towers.
Yeah.
Out there. Any other sources that we're medium?
I don't think so. One thing that maybe we should plug is your new Instagram.
Yes, so we now have a massive social media budget.
Yeah.
Well, we don't, but we have. What do we have? I have making an effort with social media. So we're on Instagram and Facebook and
Twitter probably.
Twitter
so
under the old handle.
Yeah.
Yes, that's All Media Mothership. It's a great location to go to. If you're curious about some of the stories we discuss, I post links up to those sources on our Facebook page, Media Mothership, or Instagram. And if you want to go and dig a bit deeper in your forensic fandom, you can go to those sources to check out some of the links that we've talked about. Also, another thing to mention is here at Edge Radio, we do provide great training for people. We've got another training schedule class coming up start of next month.
Yeah, there you go. The last one was ended a week ago?
2 weeks ago, yep.
2 weeks ago.
And you survived that, and you're now on air.
I was a part of it. Sadly, I missed two of the classes, but that's okay because I got everything out of the other two classes. They made up for the two classes that I missed. So it's just that good.
It's so flexible. So, that's right. Yeah, so you too one day could sound just like Zeke.
That's right. Just like me.
So that's you can find out more information about that on the Edge Radio website. So Media Mothership, what do we do on Media Mothership? We look at everything in and around the world of media and popular culture. We try and mainly what I'm interested in with Media Mothership, as the name suggests, is this idea that media sources, television, newspapers, internet, radio, can for many people be a mothership, right? It's from which they understand the world around them. And there's positives and negatives to that. You know, if you've never been to Japan and all you know about Japan is from the movies, you might be expecting a lot of maybe Bosozoku motorbike riders, right? If you've seen the 1980s Michael Caine, I'm thinking of Black Rain, which is like
sure.
Michael Douglas.
Oh,
yeah, and he's a LA cop, goes to Japan, and he rubs shoulders against the Yakuza and motorbike gangs in Japan, which are called Bosozoku.
That's very interesting. I watched a video, this was weeks ago, maybe even months ago, and it was somebody who just lives in Japan, and he went and he talked to a former Yakuza, and he was saying, basically talking about how accurate is the depictions of the Yakuza. And he said that basically, in summation, it was a long interview, but he said in summation that the Yakuza is nothing like in video games, movies, or whatever else. It's just like they use the name, but the way the organization, the structure, and everything happens is completely different in how it actually happens, apparently, according to him.
And that's one of the things that fascinates me about media, how media can shape reality around us. How for some people, the reality they think exists is questionable because it's based on fictional media sources which are not representing a truth, but instead representing a good story that's entertaining, and that'll be hopefully worth watching. But in no way representing the reality of it. Now, of course, there's positives to that. Again, if we keep talking about Japan, we can think about the idea of advertising Japan as cool Japan. The theory that I came across to explain this, I don't know if you were in one of my lectures when I talked about soft power.
Yeah, probably.
Joseph Nye's theory of soft power. It's a sociology concept where he argues that you have hard power on one hand, which is, of course, military, weapons, as the main example. It could be money, right? It's something which wields hard, transparent impact on making global change occur, right? So if you want to influence another country, how can you do that? Well, you can use hard power. You send your army in, or you send your money in, and you create change through that hard, brute force of a hammer. And then Joseph Nye said, on the other hand, you could see examples of soft power, where if you want to influence another country and their people's view of you, you instead create culture and aspirational narratives in your popular texts, which people look positively upon. So you could think of, for example, the idea that American Hollywood narratives, right? So Hollywood and the idea of Hollywood, the idea of the American dream that Hollywood films kind of encapsulate, and people wanting to go to America because they've seen American movies and they've fallen in love with this idea of the soft power of America, that it's all going to be like an American movie, it's going to be full of cowboys or something. And advertising obviously uses that, and that's a kind of really distinctive cultural, what some theorists call odor, right? So some culture wields its influence around the world through having a very strong association with it, a fragrance almost. So if you love American culture, you love hamburgers and basketball and cowboy movies, I don't know who that person is. It seems very demographic. But anyway, that idea is that, you fall in love with the idea of America. Many people feel like I, in the 90s, did a research project on manga and anime and how it was globalizing at that period of time. And it was articulating for many Australian students that I was interviewing in the late 90s, this aspirational 21st century narrative of Australia's turn to Asia and Japan being this high-tech wonderland, and manga and anime was booming, Akira, Ghost in the Shell. And it was this idea of Japan as this kind of Orientalist or techno-Orientalist fantasy based on a love of its music, popular culture, even food. Right, if you love the cuisine of a culture, that would be considered soft power. And some of that power then can foster a positive sense of that country in a way that you might support, its interests. You might have very positive things to say about it. You might spend your money in there by going as a tourist. But again, that idea of soft power, how you can wield cultural influence. So I'm really fascinated by how media has that power. So in Media Mothership, we try and look at examples of that occurring. Either people that have found how fake some of the media is in terms of how it misrepresents realities around us. Tassie, Australia, it's an interesting question. What does Australia's soft power mean, right? I mean, we used to in the 80s have Crocodile Dundee as
Steve Irwin,
which is kind of a clone of that Crocodile Dundee
or like
space.
The real life version. Kind of, I guess.
They kind of
embellished
Bush,
a little
Larrican,
bit, probably. But, I mean, he was very larger than life.
How would you define the Crocodile Dundee, Steve Irwin, Crocodile Hunter myth? What are the key semiotic signifier and signifieds?
I don't know.
Like Bush, right? Like you're
Bush,
kind of outback guy.
Outback, yeah.
And your guide's very masculine.
Crocodile Dundee had a bit of a different outfit. Obviously, Steve Irwin had the Australia Zoo kind of, I don't know, the khaki, is that what it is? Like that kind of outfit.
Yeah, a little more realistic, right? He was still wearing clothes as opposed to a crocodile vest.
Yeah, and like the boots and everything like that. But his was more of a uniform, whereas I guess the Crocodile Dundee had a uniform. I suppose you could argue it would be. But yeah, the hat with the... Did it have crocodile teeth on
Well,
it?
I guess, have you ever seen anyone wearing those clothes? Like in the streets of Hobart, or
Not,
if you've travelled interstate, Melbourne, Sydney. Like, do you walk around and you go, I'm going to go to Woolworths because I need to get some bread.
Yeah,
Oh,
no.
look, there's someone dressed up normally as Crocodile Dundee or Steve Irwin.
Yeah, I don't think... I
No
don't
one
think I
wears
would have seen anyone as Crocodile Dundee. Probably not Steve Irwin, because the people who wear those things are probably at, like, wildlife sanctuaries and
Yeah.
zoos and everything. They may only be in that outfit if they're quickly running in to the store before they get home or something. I don't know.
But it is kind of unrealistic. I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of like, it's not a 5-minute drive to get to your crocodile hunter location.
Yeah.
Like, that's very misread. But I have heard, I read this article a few years back about the phenomena called koala diplomacy that Australia seems to do all the time. And it's a kind of soft power. It's not a cultural soft power, right? It doesn't come from a movie or a text we've created, a piece of culture that people look and go, that's a great story, that's a great character. Instead, it's simply exploiting, I would argue, the natural flora and fauna of Australia. So koala diplomacy are those moments where you have an international politician or high-profile person, and inevitably there'll be a photo of them with a koala at a zoo, right? And that's the extent
true.
of our cultural leverage that that reads well to an international audience, right? So it's like, I guess I remember seeing a photo of Angela Merkel, the at the time German Chancellor, was visiting, and she had a photo with a koala, right? And that would play well to the local German media back home, as well as here, right?
Yeah, and I think one also other thing would be maybe like Larricanism and like not taking yourself too seriously as well, which I think is translated quite a lot, because I remember
That kind of Paul Hogan.
Yeah, and I remember, especially with Paul Hogan, but also I remember there was a news broadcast. There was some maybe American news broadcasters that came over, probably during an event or something, like, say, I don't know, the Sydney Olympics when that was here. That was years ago, but they were over at a zoo looking at a koala, and the guys there were saying that they were talking about drop bears.
Oh gosh, right, yeah, which is an urban legend.
Yeah, and so
do you want to explain the drop bear urban legend?
So there's an urban legend that they're basically koalas, as you can imagine them, but I think their drop bears are slightly bigger. They live in trees as well, obviously, and they wait for people to walk by, and then they drop down on people, and they have like sharp claws. I mean, koalas have sharp claws as well, but they have even sharper claws, and they'll drop down and then try to, I think sometimes, I don't know whether it is always within the drop bear, but it's kind of a vampiric kind of inspiration. It kind of has like fangs, and maybe like it tries to like bite your neck kind of thing.
Like a chupacabra? What's the Mexican?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the chupacabra. So, so it drops down on you and then tries to take a chunk out of you and drink your blood. And this is just an urban legend that has been spread around.
It's completely fake. There's no such thing as drop bears, but inevitably it's something which you hear people talking about to take the piss of an international tourist that comes down here, and they'll say, "Oh, gotta watch out for the drop bears." I never really got it. I mean, like, we have a yowie, right, as an actual mythological monster creature. Why don't we just double down and talk about yowies in that way? Right, go the whole chupacabra angle and say, well, we've invented this drop bear thing as this kind of, larrikin type effort to say, well, because to me it ties into the idea that, everyone overseas thinks that we've got kangaroos everywhere, in our front yards. You can ride them to work.
Yeah, and I guess the drop bear thing is an extension of, everything in Australia is really scary.
Yes.
And it will bite you, and if it bites you, it kills you.
That's right. And it can be small, like the redback spider.
All the way from the redback
web
up to, I don't know what the biggest thing would be, but I mean, the kangaroo's pretty big. That's also the other thing, the kangaroo. A lot of people look at the kangaroo, especially those photos where, like, they kind of, like, have their chest forward and everything, and you can just see, because obviously they're quite muscular creatures, so they're just like rippling with muscles, everything. They're just like, what? And then you go like, and they're like this tall, like taller than me. Sometimes they're just on the road. Sometimes people crash into them. and it goes in and breaks the windscreen. And they're like, what? I don't want to go to that place. It probably doesn't work that well because people probably don't want to come here because of that.
Yeah, look, it is. Well, I know that's where you have that whole kind of what's it called, extreme tourism, adventure tourism narrative, where you come here because it's a buzz, because it's a whitewater rafting, spider attack.
Yeah, and I guess that also links into. I don't know whether it necessarily would have started it or just promulgates it, but the Crocodile Dundee and Steve Irwin both sort of reside within that idea of like Australia being a dangerous place. Obviously, crocodile wrestling, he wrestles crocodiles.
That's a good point.
Or did wrestle crocodiles.
Yep.
I mean, well, Crocodile Dundee, the big knife and all that. You think that's a knife? And
that's pretty much like we almost ossified the Australian identity at that point. Like 80s happened, Dundee and Steve Irwin through the 90s, and we really, I mean, I'm thinking of other moments, possibly being the Sydney Olympics, which you mentioned, and Roy and HG, and the what was it, the Fatso Wombats?
Yeah.
That they kind of just culture jammed into the Olympics as the unofficial mascots.
Yeah.
And it got to that level where one of the gold winners brought Fatso the Wombat to get his medal on the podium. And then the Olympic committee had to ban it, I think, and say you only can bring the official mascots or something like that. But again, that was Roy and HG, of course, who were, I know them from Triple J, the sports kind of pastiche hosts, right? They kind of do this parody of sports on Triple J, and they were the ABC commentators or one of the ABC commentators for the Spinning Olympics, and I think that secured a lot of attention for Australia and this type of kind of larrikin humor within Australia, and it did it really well. I think it did it in a way which actually wasn't alienating as the kind of dated Paul Hogan performance might have been. That it was good to actually have. I mean, it's still very male oriented, right? I'm trying to think of a more gender diverse or progressive Australian national identity or soft power Australia. I mean, we had Olivia Newton-John pass away recently, and that secured a lot of interest around a female performer, recognition of her global impact. I wouldn't say it's interesting timing there, but I mean, it's interesting that her character on Grease was made Australian, with Olivia Newton-John coming on to perform. And I was reading briefly an article about it, talking about, she was such a huge star at that point when she was cast in Grease. She got top billing. She was able to define that character as Australian. And that was a huge moment of us breaking through. But it's interesting that Olivia Newton-John's Australianness in that movie didn't pivot into an Australian national identity. Yeah. As Paul Hogan's Crocodile Dundee 2, when he goes to America, did. But I'm thinking Neighbours as the other thing that's wrapped up recently, that got a lot of coverage, and is soft power for Australia. I'd say that's probably our most powerful soft power text.
Surely, definitely Neighbours, but isn't Home and Away as well? Especially both of those, isn't it?
Yeah, that space where you were representing a suburban Australian identity that was very relatable, that was actually, if we're talking about the difference between the Crocodile Dundee performance of Outback Australia, many Australians would much more relate to a Neighbours setting in terms of its architecture, its soundscape. I remember reading an interesting article talking about the significance of the soundscape in Neighbours. How if you were in the UK, you'd immediately, just by hearing the background sounds, hear Australia. And not as corny as the kookaburra, but you'd just have a magpie or something that you'd hear. And that kind of index to a very banal, everyday Australian sound.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, because
Kath and Kim as well. I mean, that generated quite a bit of interest, and that was celebrating, again, I think, a very relatable working class bogan Australian identity.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's unfortunate about Australia's soft power is I don't think necessarily we've had as much investment in our entertainment and that kind of thing.
Sport. I think if we think of investments, suddenly I'm thinking maybe because of Commonwealth Games. Would you put sport as soft power? I guess it is, right? I mean, here Australia has invested enormous amounts of money in our sporting programs, and we can see that transparently when we get, in the Olympics, in the Commonwealth Games, as one of the biggest medal winners. And that, I think, does articulate, if you were to interview people from the UK, maybe, or anywhere from the world, maybe they would articulate a sense that Australia has this very, nature-oriented sporting physique space, which, again, I don't think is representative of the reality of BC levels. And
I think that's because that's the only thing that we put out. We put out sport. We put out, obviously, that nature thing, obviously, with Steve Irwin and Crocodile Dundee and all that kind of thing. And we haven't really updated it as much. Obviously, Kath and Kim did happen, but
they seem like outliers.
Yeah, and at that time when Kath and Kim, that was when like a lot of, because that's from the ABC, that was when a lot of good ABC shows and that kind of thing, there was a lot of good stuff coming out of there, whereas I feel like there's a lot of probably still good stuff coming out of the ABC, but you don't hear about it as much. It's not as much of a cultural impact as Kath and Kim and even like the Chasers War and everything and like all these kinds of things. So a lot more impact with those, but now we don't really have much of that. Movies-wise, we don't really have, Crocodile Dundee. We have nothing that's that big.
No, it's interesting. We have actors,
yeah,
Russell Crowe in particular, and Chris Hemsworth, and they, I guess, are associated with a type of ruggedness of Australian physique and attitude, which could broadly be positioned as that. But again, very white male.
And they bring in the I guess there's a little bit of a difference there because they're bringing the Larricanism, also a team up with New Zealand as well because we're in the same area. We're kind of just put together. So with Taika Waititi on Thor, taking Thor in that new direction. It's a lot more Australian, New Zealand, those two movies. I haven't seen the second one. I've only seen the Thor Ragnarok. But Thor Ragnarok was definitely a lot more Australian than New Zealand.
And there's an interesting antipodal kind of mutual self-congratulations about that success that, we can claim, through through proximity, a kind of shared cultural success that we're all punching above our weight from New Zealand and Australia, and we'll grab a bit of that New Zealand cachet as well.
It's almost like, it's like that's an like we could say it's an Australian text, but it's
filmed
really
in Australia. Again, it's one of these things, like so many films like the Aquaman film and so forth are filmed in Australia, but have no traces of Australian geography to them. And they're filmed in Australia specifically in those locations because they do stand in for
And it's even cities. Like Mad Max Fury Road by, I can't remember the director, George Miller?
Yes.
Yeah, he's Australian, I believe. And that whole thing is like, you would think very Australian. Obviously, the first few movies were filmed in Australia, I think.
They were, yeah.
But
Broken Hill.
Fury Road, I believe, was filmed maybe
South Africa.
Yeah, which is not really...
Stripped away this idea of claiming an Australian identity. Because the Mad Max ones had, with you had Mel Gibson, and you had a noticeably Australian accent that he was delivering in the first movie, at least... But the sense, that there was an Australian relationship with nature, which was very different from the Crocodile Dundee narrative. It was much more of a hostile, isolated, kind of insurmountable dwarfing of humanity compared to nature. Sense that Mad Max was articulating, which I think was fitted more with my sense of Australian geography, right? Less of a kind of, celebrate. Well, celebration is the wrong word for it. A kind of mastery of nature, which I think the Dundee and Crocodile Hunter narratives kind of project sometimes, to instead being a kind of post-apocalyptic, nature's cruel kind of space. Well, that's been a fun little segue into the mission statement for Media Mothership. We do have a little bit of news to discuss, as well as finally getting around to playing some more of those Vox Pops. Interestingly, on the Vox Pops, the last question I do ask people is there a Tasmanian pop culture? So very much worth listening to. So we'll just go through one news story, and then we'll listen to Toby and Friend from TasPop South, being interviewed during the fan convention that was a few weeks back. But the first story I want to look at is Discworld creator Terry Pratchett was an Oblivion modder. And what I like about this story is the kind of surprising storytelling that media creators can do. Have you ever read any Terry Pratchett books?
Maybe one, but it would have been ages ago, like years ago, maybe like for school or something, like high school, primary school or something.
So Terry Pratchett, of course, was an incredibly popular author, mainly known for the Discworld series. And he would, have these riotous, amusing journeys into this fantasy world. And it turns out this article in Cracked is pointing out that he also was a lover of video games. And not only did he help develop video games based on his Discworld stories, but he was also a huge modder in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion video game. So for those that don't know, modding in a video game can involve, just a video gamer, not a paid professional coder. Out of their free time and love of a game, they will mod it in a way that creates some interest in it. So it might just be, it's an old example, but I remember playing Doom way back in the early 90s, and modders would put different characters in Doom. So Doom is a first-person shooter game. You could download a mod for Doom, which is normally you're in this kind of futuristic hellscape that you're destroying demons with your weaponry through. But you could download the Simpsons mod, which instead would reskin your character as Homer Simpson, and you would be battling against reskinned demons who are reskinned as various characters from The Simpsons, Barney, and the sound effects were all there. And that's a kind of, a more effortful mod. But, smaller mods can just be adding new interfaces to it, information that can be...
It can be as simple as if something's wrong in the game, and the developers aren't listening to the fandom or anything. It's kind of really annoying. Somebody will make a mod for it, and then it'll just be like... And then sometimes a lot of people will say, "Oh, this is an essential thing you need to before you start playing it. Get this thing because it makes, I don't know, the map or something else work way better than how it does in the game."
Yeah. And modding's really interesting because it can develop in the community as an unofficial way to play the game well, right? You have to download the following mods first before you really can enjoy this game in terms of being able to see what all the explanations are. So it turns out that Terry Pratchett, very, very successful author, also spent some of his time modding Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. And the article on Crack goes into a little bit of detail talking about what he did in Elder Scrolls. And it was mainly, it turns out the article says, Pratchett's mods successfully help deal with a problem present in most single-player focused games, which is this idea of solitude. It explains that he wrote hundreds of lines of dialogue for this character called Vijay. And this NPC, so it's a non-player character who you would encounter. And so Terry Pratchett, the author, basically scripted all these dialogues for this character that then you could encounter and enjoy. And the fans loved it so much that even in Skyrim, later iterations of the Elder Scrolls franchise, you could still download this character's voice script, and other modders then created new versions of him and so forth, which is a nice idea. It'd be like if I don't know, J.K. Rowling was doing scripts for a character from GTA.
Yeah, that'd be very from the maybe not the first GTA, but one of the other ones. That'd be weird, a little Harry Potter in GTA.
Yeah, that's right. For the Harry Potter mod, like there's a Harry Potter GTA mod, and J.K. Rowling just says, "Well, I love this."
Well, it's okay. There's mods for GTA specifically. You can put anything. I think they put everything. I saw one the other day of Homelander from The Boys.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can just walk around, and then nobody can people try and punch you and stuff, and obviously that does nothing.
So it reskins you as the Homelander character,
Mm-hmm.
and then it also modifies your abilities by making you unkillable.
Yep.
And because you can, what I love about that is that it's kind of narrative extension, right? It's making reality of the kind of I just want to play this game and not die gamer desire, but instead you're doing it in a way which makes sense because I'm a Homelander, and I am going to suddenly crack and kill people.
Yeah. I think also it adds like laser vision as well.
Right.
And that kind of, I don't know what else I mean, super strength obviously, but I think most of the characters in that show do. So,
but GTA, and GTA is certainly one that has received a lot of attention. Marcus last week was talking about how that was why the Redux version of it, the new high definition re-release they made of the previous GTA versions, got such negative feedback because they stripped all the mods out and the ability to mod into that again. Any final thoughts on modding?
No. One thing that is interesting is, just because I was thinking about it when you were talking about the tendency for developers and publishers to create updated versions like that GTA, and they strip away mods or whatever. Is interesting sometimes, because mods can be, obviously you said, really small, but they can also be really big, and adding new content, new areas to the game and stuff like that. So some modders actually basically create a remake kind of thing, or like they just take the game and then they add in better graphics, like they try and update the graphics and everything. Sometimes it looks better than the official released product. That is like, here is a remake, and they're like, actually I want to play the other one that has a mod that actually makes it look way better.
Because CounterStrike was a mod that came out of a I know DayZ, which is a zombie game, was a mod for Arma.
Yeah.
Which and then DayZ became so popular that the modder was able to secure a way to just release DayZ as a standalone property. And Counter-Strike as well. I'll look it up later. Counter-Strike as well was, I think it's Half-Life.
Yes.
So,
maybe.
It was
that
a
would
Half-Life
make
mod,
sense, I think.
and then Counter-Strike became its own thing, and then has become pretty much the default.
And there's actually a lot of so I definitely Dota. If you know what Dota's a MOBA, which is a multiplayer online battle arena. It doesn't really describe what the game is. Really, there's 2 teams, 5 people, 3 lanes, and then you have like a thing that you have to protect in your base, and there's towers in each lane, and then basically you try and push your creeps, which are like your little units that will go and attack the tower and everything. You got to try and get to their base, destroy that thing. So Dota, or Dota 2 specifically, is actually the sequel to the first Dota, which was just a mod in Warcraft 3.
Right.
Yeah, and all those characters, you can actually look at them because they've like reskinned them and changed them enough where they don't get into copyright issues. But a lot of the characters are just characters from Warcraft because it's a mod in Warcraft. So they were just like, here's a MOBA with like all the characters that are in there. So
wow. So yeah, because World of Warcraft went on to become huge. Warcraft is an earlier iteration.
Yeah, it's before they did World of Warcraft, which is now just the MMO that they just continue releasing updates for. But they had before that, obviously, I think Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, and then I think they went to World of Warcraft. And then now that just continues.
And Dota also was a kind of spin-off of that space in terms of a mod that then became much, well, I guess, World of Warcraft went on to become huge, but Dota itself became this huge phenomena.
Yeah, it was a very popular mod, so then can't remember exactly the entire story, but so then they took it off and created their own. Dota 2, well, I guess, I don't know how it worked, because there must have been somebody, I think maybe whoever created it maybe sold the IP or whatever to Valve, who owns Steam, which is a platform where you can buy games, and they made Dota 2. Yeah, and you can see like a lot of the characters, like one character specifically, there's a drow ranger in World of Warcraft, who's a very popular character in World of Warcraft, and there is just a drow ranger like just called Drow Ranger in Dota 2.
And he still reveals there's still traces of this mothership,
Yeah, yeah. So
Of
it's basically changed enough
Warcraft.
where they don't get into copyright
Yeah.
issues. And there's been a few times I used to play Dota 2, and there was a character called Skeleton King, and they changed him to Wraith King, and they had like a whole in-game story thing about how like he's went from using the skeleton thing to going into using Wraith energy to keep himself alive. But the real reason that they changed it was because they had to, otherwise they get copyright from Warcraft.
Yeah, and I love those stories how there's a diegetic explanation in the game lore. Like the lore of Dota has an explanation for this. And fans also have probably also kind of bent over backwards to explain in world why this makes sense. But then you've also got this very pragmatic legal issue and it's just conveniently dealing with around copyright.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's very interesting. And yes, there's a lot of big games that are actually, because I think CounterStrike, I think maybe just a lot of Valve games are maybe just mods that they've purchased or they've hired the person who made them and then brought on a team and then they created the game. So it says CounterStrike, which I think we believe is a mod or was a mod first, Dota, and then, well, they had Half-Life, which I guess, I don't even know whether that was a mod.
Look, it is.
Who knows?
I mean, the thing that fascinates me about this space is that we've got so many examples because of corporate ownership and licenses expiring. And I think Shazam was also, like, characters in the superhero space like Shazam were also ways of dealing with the fact that I think it was Mr. Marvel at one point, and then Mr. Marvel got bought out. Anyway, it's one of these spaces where they had to rename a character.
I think with that one, it's really funny because I think some people believe that they changed Shazam because of Marvel. They have Captain Marvel and all that kind of thing. But I think it's because the character was made by a different company. And then they needed to change the name of the character. I think it was a whole, but it actually has nothing to do with Marvel.
And we had that space where people have had to kind of like, look, it looks like that character, but it really isn't because we're calling him this character and he has this different backstory now. But then also you have these moments like the Lego movie where all these franchises can come together and play in a way that seems to go against all copyright narratives, right? That you'll have the DC superheroes with the Lord of the Rings characters. What other franchises are in there? My Little Pony?
Yeah, probably.
Basketballers? Anyway, all this kind of cutting across these entire franchises in space. And it's this weird space Lego has been able to create through, I guess, licensing deals for its actual built product. That then means they've secured, for a short time, I'm imagining, rights to use these characters together in a Lego space. Yeah. And so suddenly, you can have this fan fiction. Like normally it's only in the world of fan fiction where you combine these franchises that can't come together, right? I guess the classic one was when Marvel was selling off its characters like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and the X-Men, and those got gobbled up by Sony. And then Marvel became really successful with its movies, but couldn't have Spider-Man anymore, or Fantastic Four, or the X-Men. And so you had this kind of like, well, we're still making comic books with those characters, but our films, those characters don't exist. But then Sony wanted to play with Marvel, and so suddenly Spider-Man reappears in the Marvel universe because Sony's happy for that to happen because of a win-win scenario.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of interesting because I don't think they really did it that often, but when they lost the rights to X-Men, X-Men is probably one of the most popular comics that Marvel has.
Why they sold it, to get a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the Inhumans, which are kind of, I describe them as an off-brand X-Men. They basically are mutants, except their powers get activated by this mist, this like sort of mystical mist that when you inhale it, it then basically, I suppose, activates your X gene, except not because it's in humans. And then you get superpowers.
But it's kind of like, it's articulating a mutant narrative. And in the comic book space where you can talk about the X-Men, it's explainable. But because in the moviescape they don't own the X-Men, here's a space that Marvel could commit to hopefully scratch that itch.
Yeah,
of
and I
mutant.
think the main Inhuman characters like Black Bolt, who was in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, spoilers if you haven't seen it, and the rest of that royal family, I think they're called the royal family.
Yep.
They existed before, but then I think the Inhumans, when they basically fleshed that whole concept out, I guess. But they tried to essentially create this new comic book and push it, and then stop publishing as many, if not all, X-Men comics, and basically replace X-Men with Inhumans. But obviously, people didn't like that because I think a lot of people who probably read Marvel probably read X-Men.
So interesting because again, this is a question of motherships, right? So if you see the mothership of superheroes for Marvel as the comics, you'd think, well, as long as, and that's why Marvel never has kept the rights to all of its characters in its comic book space. So all those characters are still there, but then because of the success of the movies and the fact that much more money is coming into Marvel from the movie world, as well as more people know about these characters and are exposed to them through the movies than the comic books. While the comic books are first and the origin, they really fell by the wayside. And you can see that with, as you were saying, they were trying to recenter the Marvel comic book space in a way which I guess would match up with the movie universe. And so downplay those characters which they no longer have ownership to do movie versions of. The Fantastic Four, the X-Men in particular. And so, you had these weird moments of like the Fantastic Four breaking up and all those characters kind of disappearing. And many people were saying, well, this isn't about good storytelling. This is about them looking at trying to create a viable synergy. Because it's very difficult. Look, it's super intimidating as a superhero, as a new superhero fan, to come into that comic book space and pick up a comic book and read it, because these are multi-issue deep dives into melodrama often. Like I think of it like a wrestling match or a kind of soapy that's been going for decades and decades. Like you just can't pick it up very easily because it could either be in a reboot cycle and suddenly all these characters have been redefined, or so it's a huge barrier of entry. They were trying to, I guess, synergize, but then that can all be changed. It does look like, Spider-Man coming back. No one thought that could happen. So
and then now they do own the rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four.
Is that because look, it was fun seeing in Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness. It was interesting though that the music cue, which starts when Professor X rolls in, is from the cartoon series.
Yeah, and his late
90s
wheelchair. I don't know whether you can call it a wheelchair if it doesn't have any wheels, but wheelchair.
But the design is the cartoon design, rather than the who was it, the Springer movies, the X-Men movies from the 90s. Rather than, I guess. And I guess that's a mothership question, right? That rather than saying the X-Men's mothership is the movies, which popularized the X-Men across a bigger cohort than the comics had, that they're saying, no, we're not saying that Patrick Stewart, who was Professor X in that movie, is the Patrick Stewart from that world. He's the Patrick Stewart from the cartoon world made flesh.
Yeah, but then it's weird because it kind of seemed like he wasn't the X-Men. I guess, well, now the reboot, they're going to have not reboot, but the continuation, X-Men 97. So, but it seems like he wasn't that character. He was just...
Well, it's a multiverse, right? At that point, the excuse is, well, it's a multiverse. This is Earth 957, so...
I don't know. It's really confusing. I don't know. And it's really weird how, like, sometimes the universes they have... I guess that's all. It's the multiverse. It feels a bit lazy, but the multiverse, where some of them don't change that much, but then... And some of the characters don't change. Benedict Cumberbatch is Doctor Strange in every universe, it seems. But Tom Holland isn't Spider-Man in every universe. Tobey Maguire is in one, and Andrew Garfield is in another.
For me, it's a classic conundrum of multiplicity versus canon, I guess. Like, are you comfortable with the idea of multiplicity, of kind of different iterations of the same character, and the art and the creator will simply put out there a new version of it, and it'll be a hard reboot, and it'll change it completely, but deal with it. And, some fans are fine with that. They can let go of what they cherish from the older version and deal with having 5 different types of Spider-Man and say, oh, okay, they're all fine. But others want it to stay canon. And like Star Wars, no, Luke Skywalker can only be this Luke Skywalker, and you can't have these other iterations. And like The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker, it does not exist for me, and so forth.
Yeah.
That they can't, that some fans really aren't comfortable with the idea of I guess multiple versions of a character and not seeing any one of them as the defining character. And I guess Batman's like that. There's a new version of Batman, and people say that's not the right Batman. Yeah. Batman doesn't shoot a gun, therefore that's the wrong Batman. But then you look at the history of Batman, and the early comics had him shooting guns. And it's like, well, and the development of who that Batman is basically did iterate over the early serialized radio dramas, the comics, the short TV or film episodes that have... And then the Tim Burton version. Well, let's play a Vox Pop.
Yep.
Here's a Vox Pop of 2 guys, Toby and his friend, talking at TasPop South 2 weeks ago about their experiences. So what's the first pop culture that comes to the top of your head right now? First pop culture on the top of your head.
Star Wars.
Doctor Who.
Good choices. Very solid. Have you seen any Star Wars Doctor Who here so far?
Yes. I think a bit more Star Wars than Doctor Who, which is probably why that answer came to me, I think. Yeah.
I saw one Jodie Whittaker, but the rest I've seen like an Anakin, a Vader, Kenobi, so more Star Wars.
Pretty classic, yeah. All right, biggest surprise so far at the festival?
Just how they've managed to fit everything in the new layout, how everything's organised, and just a bit different, but they've done a good job with it.
Any surprises for yourself so far?
Not really, no. I mean, I'm just a little bit disappointed at how it turned out, sort of thing. I mean, going down to Sandy Bay was a lot better. I think it was set out better, and it was a lot better to look at, and there was little rooms you go off to see the little things people put on.
It's like it was a rest point for a while, and it was at Sandy Bay, UTAS campus. All right, here's the last really tough, even tougher than that question. Is there any such thing as a Tasmanian pop culture?
Tasmanian pop culture. The puffer jackets. There you go.
I'm cosplaying as that.
Tuxedo, as they say. The Tasmanian tuxedo, yes.
Perfect answer, Toby.
No, I don't think we got anything. It's all trash.
Yeah, take that, Tassie. All right, guys, thanks so much. You have a great rest of the afternoon. Okay, so that's it. We're at the top of the hour. We've finished. Adrian's up next. This has been Media Mothership for another week with Dr. Craig Norris, joined by B.A. Zeke. Zeke. See, that was alternative world, multiplicities.
That's right, the alternative me sitting in this seat.
Any thoughts?
I don't think so. I think I said everything I wanted to.
Great. All right. Well, keep listening to Edge Radio 99.3. Adrian's around the corner. This has been Media Mothership for another week, saying thank you.